everyone, so in this video I am continuing on my little mini series on the best and the worst of S-Class Toons, and in this video we are on my 7th tier of Toons, so my next to last worst Toons that I believe are S-Class in the RTS world. Now I'm going to have to be making updates as I go along because there's been some new S-Class Toons that have been released since my last video, and just as new Toons come out I will slot them in different categories accordingly. So my original video that I made was my double F class. They had Kapoor, Marlon and Rosie, Eugene, Malcolm, and Tiffany. And guys, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more content and information. So the first Toon on my F class is Secretary Gao. So Secretary Gao was actually a Toon that I went for early on in the game. And that was before I had Dr. Stevens. So the 6-star Dr. Stevens that gives 60% AP to 2 other Toons whenever you end up rushing him. Now, I had to use Secretary Gao because I had no chance of getting 6-star Dr. Stevens until Hellgate occurred. But since Hellgate happened and everyone and their dog has Dr. Stevens, Gao is just less needed. His rush is 76 AP, which is kind of slow. It's only 450% damage to one enemy and all adjacent, so it hits everyone. It can apply bleed as well, so that is fairly effective. But 650 bleed is just too low. Even though bleed can stack, I don't see him as being that viable for dealing enough damage to the enemies to actually be noticeable or dealing enough bleed. He's kind of in between, and this is that kind of awkward stage where he doesn't deal enough bleed damage to be on a bleed team, but he doesn't deal enough normal damage to be on a damage dealing team. Now, Gao's active skill was the original reason why I picked him up. It's a turn 2 active skill, so it's slower than Dr. Stevens, deals 650 burn damage for 2 turns to a line of enemies, and up to 2 teammates get up to plus 60% AP, which is pretty useful because it's the same as Dr. Stevens, so it can help you with rushing 2 Toons early, and as long as you understand AP manipulation, you can guarantee that this AP will go to the exact Toons that you want it to. So that makes Secretary Gao to be pretty effective, but because everyone has Dr. Stevens, you don't really need Secretary Gao, in my opinion. Secretary Gao has a leadership skill that, is kind of useful, so all alert and fast teammates get a huge bonus to AP when attacking, and all enemies get plus 75% heal reduction. Even though it's a 3-turn heal reduction, it's not very effective. 75% isn't high enough. It has to be 100% or nothing, in my opinion at least. So overall, Secretary Gao is just not an effective Toon. I don't see him being useful in survival mode very much, in raids, in onslaught, in hordes, in any aspect of the game. So I'm a little disappointed actually that I picked him up early. I could have saved myself a lot of time, a lot of gear, a lot of trainers, a lot of food, but at the time without having Dr. Stevens, he was my next best bet. And unfortunately now he's basically irrelevant to me. So this is why Secretary Gao is on my F class of tier Toons. I guess his little saving grace is that he doesn't have a bound weapon, so you could even give him Mia's pistol that is in the season store, which gives additional attack as well as crit chance to adjacent teammates. So if you don't have Dr. Stevens, you could slot in Secretary Gao instead and use his AP gain while also giving some attack and crit chance to 2 Toons that are adjacent to you, so like Priya and Princess, for example. The next Toon on my F class list is Alito, and I feel like I might get some pushback on this, but the reasoning why Alito is in my second to last tier of Toons for S classes is just that bleed teams are not as effective as they used to be. It's very difficult to create a cohesive and fast bleed team. They're fairly effective in onslaught, but with the onset of infection, bleed is almost irrelevant to an extent. Infection is just so much more absolute than having to rely upon your bleed stacking over and over again. Alito, he has a 76 AP rush. 1500 bleed is a high amount of bleed. He can apply that heal reduction 100% at that, as well as crosshairs, but it's only applied to 2 enemies. So this is when it just gets a little dangerous to use because you're applying a high amount of bleed, but if you don't have a way of spreading it, so lacerations to increase the bleed, if you don't have pain spread, but you're only pain spreading the bleed and not, say, the heal reduction or the crosshairs, like it's just an inconsistent toon to use, and his AP is too high to be as highly functioning as other toons. With Alito's active skill, I don't really like it. Up to 2 enemies get crosshairs for 4 turns. So crosshairs just means if a toon dies while underneath this influence, they become decapitated, which is useful, but you're really hoping for some fast kills. And if you're just hoping that the revivers on the enemy teams don't bring toons back, well, your matches are probably going on for a while. Like, I don't like this as an active skill. It only does 1 or 2 things, not even 2 things. It just does crosshairs, and it's reliant upon you actually killing the enemy and them actually having a revive toon on the defensive team. If a defensive team doesn't have a reviver, you're kind of just having a wasted active skill that you're never going to need or use. Like if there was a defense down linked with it, it would be a much more effective active skill. I think the best part about Alito is that his leadership skill. All alert and strong teammates get a huge bonus to AP when attacking. All enemies get 600 bleed for 3 turns at the beginning of each wave. I made a video on this about how Alito's 600 bleed is enough to clear territories like Factory and Northern Train Depot. So he's effective in territories, but in raids he's too slow. In war he's too slow. In Onslaught, he's slower and less effective than Infection. It's just very difficult to slot this toon in now. And then when we look at his bound weapon, 30% attack, his rush does no damage. So having this attack stat is really useless. It should be defense or HP. And then the third slot, impair when attacking. So a great chance is 50%, which isn't bad. But on a toon like this, I would want to add pain spread to his weapon. But if I have a chance of impairing the enemy, it means I could end up pain spreading the impair instead of the bleed damage, which is what I want because bleed stacks. So this type of weapon, I would need to not only 5-star it, but I would need to weapon swap it with maybe a focused stun gun instead. Overall, Alito just has such limited use, and in the current meta, he doesn't really fit in. So again, I think I might get some backlash from people on this character in my tier 7, but overall I don't see him as a must-have character that has multiple uses. I see him as one use, and that's to get a territory back from walkers, and at that it's very limited territories. So I guess we'll see. Like, if anyone has any other ideas to use Alito, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. Again, I know that there are bleed teams you can use him in. It's just very difficult to build a cohesive bleed team that is fast and effective. The next toon on my list is AJ. Now, AJ is a toon that never impressed me. I think in my blog post that I wrote, I called him a Franken toon because, he had a little bit of everything, but he was not good at anything. Like, he seemed pretty good on paper because he had a normalize ability, he could deal some damage, but I just found him to be a pretty ineffective character. His attack stat is just too low. His rush, he needs 76 AP, it's only 600% damage, and it's to a line of enemies, and then he recovers all penalties. Well, if he's rushing, he's obviously not stunned, he's not confused. Well, he might be confused or taunted if he's focused, but he's not impaired. There's just a number of statuses that he definitely does not have because he's able to rush. So I don't see how effective this rush is because, like, we look at a Rav, and a Rav gains 100% AP after rushing, which means he can rush right away again if you command him. So recovering from all penalties, there's very few penalties that AJ will actively be recovering from when he rushes. If his rush ended up giving him an attack or defensive bonus on top of what he did, then you know what, he might be better. But the way AJ is, I just don't see a use for him. Like, his active skill, it's a turn 2 active skill. He can normalize and impair for 2 turns a line of enemies and gains 35% AP. Okay, so normalizing and impairing a line is pretty useful, but if you don't have another damage dealer, if you don't have better characters that are supposed to be damage dealers to follow up on this, Well, AJ is kind of just a sitting duck because we have Princess who can normalize 3 characters. Why would we want to use a character that only normalizes 2? It's less effective and he has a 3-turn cooldown. So you'd need to still run other characters that can normalize the enemy. And in my opinion, Princess is just a much better choice of toon. Like AJ's specialist skill, Cutthroat, so whenever this character deals damage to a fighter that is under the effect of a debilitating status, AJ will deal 50% extra damage. But I think this 50% extra damage would be based on however much they would do on a normal attack. So it's not like if they deal 12,000 damage on their rush, they're not going to deal 18,000 damage on their rush. It would be like, well, 12,000 damage, that's at 600%. So that means it's usually 2,000 damage. Half of that is 1,000. So now it's 13,000 damage, which is only a slight increase compared to the 50% increase that we think we're going to get. Like AJ, I guess, is saving grace again. No bound weapon, so you can kind of give him whatever you want. But I have no idea what you would want to give him. Maybe a fast healing weapon. But I just think that he's a Frankenstein of a toon that really has no business being on anyone's attack or defensive team. So the next toon on my list is S-Class Glenn, who is the free-to-play gold brick toon. This Glenn, you can get his HP to be very high. He can be effective on very specific teams, but overall he's very underwhelming and would not make any of my attacking or defensive teams. I really wouldn't know where to slot him in. Maybe on survival road if you're going up against a team in nightmare mode and you've just lost them previously and they have their rushes maxed out and they're ready to rush, because when you rush Glenn, he is able to do minus 40 AP to all enemies, which is pretty effective. So it basically neuters them and prevents them from being able to rush. AP drains cannot be avoided or resisted, which makes this to be really effective. His rush, unfortunately, only dazes 2 enemies for 2 turns, and there's just better options to use. He's a 76 AP toon. You could choose to command rush him on the 2nd turn, for example, and that could be kind of effective, but at the same time, it would just be a slow offense to use or a fast defense to kind of go through because of all the fast rushing and powerful, tough toons. His active skill is a turn 2 active skill. It disarms 1 enemy for 2 turns. So if it was a turn 1 active skill, he would be so much better. But by being a turn 2 active skill, you can't really use the disarm effectively. If the enemy has a windowless team with no weapons that can let you gain AP without fear of being stunned, confused, taunted, and so on, well, Glenn is just not going to be helpful if your toons are already stunned or taunted on the 1st turn. He is a neutralized toon, which is kind of effective, but I just don't see this being used as often. Neutralize is basically impairing the enemy, and if you've seen my video, Killing Me Softly with the Gentleman, an impaired toon can actually cause a significant amount of damage if you're not careful and if you're not watching their mod set. Now, unfortunately with Glenn, he also has a bound weapon, 30% HP, which helps his defensive stats, a medium bonus to AP when attacking, but then has AP down, so when attacking a better chance to cause minus 30 AP to the enemy. This is a weapon that I could craft, and it's not even the best version of this weapon. There's an option where you can get minus 50 AP to the enemy when attacking. So having this weapon is just kind of a letdown, because with this defensive toon, you would want like a stun gun or a focus stun weapon, or at least the minus 50 AP down. By having the minus 30, it's kind of like a kick in the butt, because you could have crafted this or given him any other alert weapon that you've already crafted to perfection. And the last toon that's in my F class, S classes is Steve. Steve was the WOC 2 toon, and you know what, I was pretty proud to actually obtain him. I had to hit 500,000 points in the WOC, which was very intense and very difficult, and Steve has just kind of been a letdown. He's kind of a fun toon to use. I've been able to use him in Onslaught, for example, but I would never use him in War or Raids or even Survival Road, to be honest. His rush, at least it's only 66 AP, deals 2,000 burn damage to one enemy for 4 turns. That enemy and all adjacent enemies get minus 20% AP. So minus 20% AP is a very small amount of AP drained. It would have almost been better just being minus 20 AP because it would have been a flat amount. But minus 20%, like on a 76 AP toon, that's only, I think, 16 AP, which is less than 20 AP. And it's just so easy to make up that difference with AP weapons, with 35% AP gain on active skills. It's just not an effective rush, especially because 2,000 burn is hardly enough to break through a true defensive team that can have upwards of 12,000 HP. His active skill is kind of useful, but it's just so slow. So it's a turn 3 active skill. Up to 2 teammates recover from infection. Up to 3 teammates get 30% bonus HP. Now, personally, I hate bonus HP. It has no real use because it can't actually recover toons from infection. It's just extra HP that can be eaten through with burn, bleed, maim, or infection. And recovering 2 toons from infection, usually if it's someone like Mateo, 4 toons are affected. Or if it's a toon like Trader, everyone could be affected by infection. So Steve is just too slow to use. His rush is okay, his active skill could be more useful if the cooldown was faster, if it was like a 1-turn cooldown, and if the initial cooldown was turn 2 instead. His specialist skill, Fire Starter, isn't seen very often, but he can spread the burning effect, which is a little useful, but as I mentioned before, like 2,000 burn, well, if you spread it to someone else, they have 2,000 burn. Burn does not stack like bleed, and it being a flat amount just doesn't make it effective on an attack team. Maybe on a defensive team, but that's a big maybe. So Steve's weapon is one area that I'm kind of hit or miss on. I like it, but I also don't like it. So 30% attack, a medium bonus to AP when attacking, but the third slot, when attacking, a better chance to recover from confuse and make a second attack at 400% of a damage. So I like this weapon to an extent. The double attack at 400% of a damage means he hits really hard. The downside is you could still be confused by like Jackie and attack yourself on the first team. More so, you could double attack yourself on the first turn and end up killing your own toon because of Steve's power, and you might hit your Dr. Stevens, for example, and at that point it's kind of just game over. So although I like Steve for Onslaught, he's just not a very effective toon, and I wish they would have done a better design for him, especially when we compare him to Georgia, who just came out as the WOC 3 toon. Georgia has been a great addition to my defensive team, and Steve has kind of just rode the pine for me ever since I got him, occasionally getting some time when there's Onslaught going on. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching and listening to my video. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think of my F-Class, S-Class toons.